106.5 WFMP. This is Community Control Now, the show seeking democratic community control of public institutions with a particular interest in the U.S. policing apparatus. I'm your co-host, Vincent Gonzalez. Sitting right beside me, Michael T. Say what's up to the people.
What's happening?
All right. Community Control Now believes in all power to all oppressed people all over the world. But today's show, we got a pound-for-pound heavyweight champion in the revolutionary historian game, Dr. Gerald Horne. Say what's up to the people here.
It's all good. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Right now, the John Jay and Rebecca, what was that last name on Rebecca?
Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston.
Yes, sir. Credentials from Princeton, Columbia, Berkeley, the author of over 30 books, including your latest book on Brazil. And it's an honor and just privilege to have you on with us here today. Thank you so much for your time here. I was going to let my brother just get right into it.
Okay, yes, Dr. Horne. I've been following you very closely the last 10 years.
Right on.
And I've referred to your work. I think Vincent sent you a copy of a piece that I've written about the rise of the white nationalist state.
Yeah, it was an audio on SoundCloud, correct?
Yes, we did do it as a, part, we serialized it like that, but it's part of a complete paper where I attempt to chart the rise of the white nationalist state called the United States from the colonial period to right after the founding of the nation state up to the naturalization laws. But for this interview, we have a couple of questions for you. We know you could, probably have a lot to say about it. And if we have 3 questions, and if we have time, we have one more.
Okay.
And I'll just start with the first one. In response to the unabating police repression African Americans and others have experienced, many activists, including those at this podcast, are advocating for community control of the municipal police departments across the country as a strategy and reform pending abolition of policing as we know it. Now, Dr. Horne, what is your view on this and some of the other strategies being proposed to address this burning issue?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Secondly, I welcome this initiative. My only comment would be that I trust and I hope that you folks are in touch with people in other cities who are trying to accomplish the same objective, such as in Chicago and Los Angeles, amongst other cities. Because I think that one of the problems with our movement today is that it is terribly fragmented and atomized, which is ironic since our opponents are united and engaged in solidarity. And that's not very good. The other point I would add that in addition to being in touch with others from the Atlantic to the Pacific who were involved in similar efforts, I think that we need a more concerted international effort. Because, as you know, from looking at my work, I have a very sour view of the history of the United States. I did not see the revolt against British rule in 1776, for example, was a great leap forward for humanity. Part of the problem is that the historians tend to take a fragmented view. That is to say, they'll look at a certain period, such as 1850 to 1865, and they know little. I'm talking about professional historians about what happened before 1850, or they'll look at 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Year I was born.
The Voting Rights Act. They know little about what happened before or after. And I think that that's a very unfortunate way of trying to look at a country as complicated as this one. I think it leads to idealistic errors. And in fact, since I'm speaking to people in Kentucky, I would urge and encourage that your group, since you seem to have a dedicated interest in history, to develop a kind of alternative history of Kentucky, because Kentucky historically was very important.
Yes.
So far as that, as I suggest in my 1776 book, part of the conflict with Britain that led to the revolt against British rule was the desire of the settlers, led by real estate speculator number one, George Washington, was to move west to take the land of the indigenous. And of course, Kentucky was key with regard to that. That leads to all the mythology about Daniel Boone, as you may know. So it would be very useful, I think, for your own organizing efforts in the state of Kentucky, for you to develop a piece that deals with this. And I think the raw materials to construct that piece are present. I don't think it would be that difficult. It's just an organizing effort. I mean, writing history is really just organizing. And it seems to me, if you can organize the community, you can organize a history book. That's the way I look at it. But to return to your point, certainly community control is welcome. It's going to be difficult. I'm sure you know that already, but it's not impossible. Particularly, as I said, if you're in sync with others in the United States who are trying to accomplish the same purpose, as well as have an international outreach. With regard to that latter point, as you may know, there are numerous human rights investigations of the United States right now, done by independent panels of lawyers, such as the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. You can look up their report that they filed. It had lawyers in Africa and all over the world investigating the United States. The Human Rights Commission of the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, has evinced serious interest in the situation here in the United States. This is nothing new. The United States, over the centuries, as I'm sure you know, has helped to develop a various list of antagonists who are very much interested in turning the tables on Washington and on Wall Street. And I think that it would be useful for our brothers and sisters, our comrades in Kentucky, to take advantage of this momentum.
Yeah, right on. Okay. And by the way, we concur with your historical analysis. We think that that analysis is the one of record right now. And as you know, there's a lot of contention even on the left around that analysis. I read your piece about down with the white nationalist left, which I'm right with you. You know, it's a shame that there's still so much white nationalism even among the left. And as you know, and I've tried to point out to people that unfortunately there's a whole history of white supremacy on the left, and that the left is sort of ashamed of that. I mean, there's been some efforts to correct that, but I think there's still some ways they need to go, especially based on what you said, that the analysis has to begin in settler colonialism, not the factory workers in the United States.
Right. Well, one of my most recent books is on the 16th century.
Yes, I've read that.
As you know, I've tried to be supportive of the 1619 Project because...
Yes, we just got a copy of that book.
Yeah, because they're scrambling to gain a new story, which is what we need. Yeah. And they're not alone. You're probably familiar with the documentary by one of our greatest filmmakers, Raoul Peck, of Haitian origin, Exterminate All the Brutes.
Yes, we saw that.
Exterminate All Brutes.
Yes, we've seen all of his work.
Yes, and the late Berkeley historian Tyler Stovall, his book White Freedom, the late Jamaican philosopher Charles Mills, his book The Racial Contract.
I have not read that.
Spoof of Hamilton, the Broadway come Disney extravaganza, the spoof of Hamilton by Ishmael Reed.
Yes, I've heard about that. I like Ishmael Reed.
Intellectuals. So it's not just the 1619 Project. People are trying to develop a new story, a new analysis. And I think you mentioned a moment ago that you said something about the left white nationalists, that they're embarrassed.
Yes, in response to your paper.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously we need we need a new story. I mean, here we are with this scandal of the prison industrial complex, with so many of our brothers and sisters on death row disproportionately, and not to mention the planet hurtling towards the precipice of disaster as a result of this crisis in Eastern Europe. So obviously we need a new story. I mean, something's not going right. And so, let us hope that this attempt to create a new story does not meet with more resistance.
Yes, and we want to ask you a question about the current Ukraine-Russian conflict.
Yes.
But before we do, back to the police repression piece. One of the main ways police are literally able to get away with murder is through qualified immunity, effectively disallowing their prosecution. Dr. Horne, as a trained lawyer and former head of the National Black Lawyers Guild, is that the proper title?
National Conference of Black Lawyers, although I used to work with the National Lawyers Guild, which, by the way, has chapters in Louisville and Lexington.
Oh, okay. How do you think activists should approach eliminating qualified immunity, if that's possible?
I think activists should proceed on many fronts. I mean, first of all, once again, on the statewide level, or is Kentucky a Commonwealth or a state?
It's a Commonwealth.
Okay. On the Commonwealth level, I think that it would be useful to be lobbying in Frankfurt, that is to say, the state capital. By the way, this is a factoid I've been carrying around in my head for a long time. The sister of the former leader of Thailand, Thaksin Shinawatra. Thaksin, of course, has been run out of power by the military, but he happens to be a billionaire. In any case, his sister went to Kentucky State. And so it
historically black college here in town.
Exactly.
Up the street here, in Frankfurt,
Yeah, so, it may be a way to raise money or whatever. I've been carrying that around in my head for a while.
Yeah, that is quite the oddity there.
It is quite so. But in any event, to return to my thread, obviously trying to lobby in the Commonwealth legislature, but once again, being in touch with your comrades elsewhere in the United States, because in California, they've been doing the same thing in Sacramento. So moving on just like community control of the police moves on a citywide level, a Louisville-wide level, qualified immunity means proceeding on a Commonwealth-wide level. And it also means proceeding on a national level, insofar as you're trying to learn from the experiences of people who've done something similar in places like California. And then ultimately, of course, you're expanding it globally to try to create momentum for pressure externally, because we know historically that because of the adverse conditions that our people have faced historically in North America, we've had to lengthen the battlefield. I mean, that was the case during the bad old days of slavery. We lengthened the battlefield with regard to generating an anti-slavery movement internationally. That was the case during the days of Jim Crow, when Paul Robeson in 1951 filed a petition with the United Nations charging the United States with genocide against Black people. That helped to create momentum internationally. And I think for various reasons, we've lost sight of those elementary lessons for reasons that need not detain us here. But in any case, we need to return to those elementary lessons. And so certainly this attempt to do away with qualified immunity, which, as I said, has received a certain amount of traction in California, folks need to pick up on that.
Okay, yeah, we need to act on that. And I really do like, the fact that you stress the international solidarity and connections, because, I mean, we're lost without that. I always recall something Malcolm X said. He says, you don't say, how did he say that? Something about you don't take your criminal. He says you don't go to the court of your criminal. You take your criminal to court.
I hear you.
Take the criminals to court.
Yeah. And it just, on the grassroots level, being locked out of certain means of power, what other ploys do we have but international solidarity? I'm saying, just hopefully a listening ear of the part of the media that hasn't been completely corrupted, and just, and the efforts that you've been a part of, like, you're a titan of various leftist publications and news stories are just like exposing the truth. That's one of the greatest truths we can hold is exposing the corruption of these things at at the highest levels that we can be afforded, and it gains us a sense of solidarity as well.
Okay, Dr. Horne,
question. Okay,
we can't let you go without asking you about your take on the current Ukraine-Russian conflict, which I'm sure you've been asked a lot about. I've seen a bunch of your interviews online. Could you give us the Cliff Notes analysis of the origins of this war and what we can possibly expect in the near future as it continues to rage and reshape the global geopolitical landscape?
Well, as you suggested, there's a piece I wrote on Black Agenda Report summarizing some of my views on this. You can easily find it. Mm-hmm. If people are not into reading, I've done interviews like this on theanalysis.news, on
yes, I've
Black
seen
Agenda Report, on KPFA Radio in Berkeley, for example, amongst others, on Saturday Morning Live, actually just yesterday, with Garland Nixon. And so my views are all over the place. But just to summarize, the crisis reflects a historical situation. What I mean is, if you look at your map, you'll readily and easily see that Russia has more territory than any other nation on the European continent.
Yes.
Has a population about twice the size of the number 2 nation, the Federal Republic of Germany. And then most of the resources on the continent, such as gold, palladium, natural gas, oil, are in Russian territory. And so this has created a contradiction for Western European nations who, as you know, as reflected by the fact that we're of African descent speaking English, after Britain began fattening itself on the pillaging of North America and the plundering of Africa, ditto for its Western European neighbors like France, there was this anomaly that they were not necessarily the dominant power in their backyard, speaking of the European continent. So Napoleon Bonaparte, about 2 centuries ago, tries to resolve this contradiction by invading Russia and is defeated. Yes. Then in the 1850s, you have Britain, France, and Turkey, the sick man of Europe, gang up on Russia. Then, and to show you how important this was to them, in 1904, 1905, London finances the Japanese attack on Russia, which is a turning point in the struggle against white supremacy, according to not only W.B. Du Bois, but Ho Chi Minh, Nehru of India, Sun Yat-sen of China, and leads directly to the Russian Revolution of 1917, which then Japan were paying, quote unquote, London by delivering a knockout blow to the British Empire in 1941-42 by seizing its cash cows in Hong Kong and Singapore. And so in some ways, the situation not only of the Western European nations, but its successor as an empire builder, speaking of the United States of America, that Russia has been like the great white whale in Moby Dick. It's driving the Captain Ahab's crazy into self-destruction. And that, of course, leads to Russia striking back, because even the New York Times acknowledged a few days ago that in order to weaken its colonial antagonists, Russia would attack them. For example, in the 1890s, when Ethiopia was subject to invasion by Italy, were not only armed to the teeth by Russia, you had Russian volunteers on the ground. The New York Times even acknowledged that. I was shocked to see a few days ago. You can look it up. And then, of course, we know that after the Soviet Union developed, the Soviets are armed Southern Africans to the teeth, which helped them to defeat apartheid by 1994. And of course, if you look at the recent vote at the United Nations on sanctions against Russia, you saw that most of the African nations in the South abstained. South Africa, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Tanzania, etc. In fact, once again, in the New York Times a few days ago, you saw a writer mention that of the 10 most populous nations on planet Earth, only one was endorsing sanctions, and that's the United States of America. In fact, a tell, T-E-L-L, to use that colloquial phrase, is if you're talking to a person on the left and they're talking about this crisis only in the bilateral sense, only in the sense of the United States versus Russia. You can't discuss this intelligently unless you talk about India, which of course is a longtime friend of Moscow and is trying to circumvent sanctions by buying Russian oil using Indian rupees, or not to mention China, which to me is the ultimate target of this whole fracas. But in order to confront China directly, you'd have to confront Tesla and Starbucks and Microsoft and Apple and Volkswagen of Germany, et cetera. And so the plan is, you weaken Russia, China's ally, and you force China to either A, go along with sanctions, which would mean weakening its ally, or B, not go along with sanctions, and then you organize a crusade against China, which it seems to me is the next step in this whole process. It's a very dangerous situation we face right now. You saw yesterday, U.S. President Joseph Biden basically called for regime change in Moscow.
Yeah, I heard that.
People think that he's dealing with Grenada or Libya or Afghanistan or Iraq. Instead, he's dealing with a power that has nuclear weapons, by some measures, more nuclear warheads than the United States does. So this is a very dangerous situation. It could end very badly, not only for the United States, not only for Russia too, but for entire humanity. So that's just my Cliff Notes version, as you put it, of this complicated crisis.
Okay, I know we don't have much time left.
Yeah, I think we got time for one more.
Okay.
Thing here. We're just gonna throw one more down here. And man, once again, we very much appreciate your time and astute understanding of these things. And we're hoping that this is the building of some serious tracks in our town here. So last question here. We are facing opposition to the teaching of accurate American history in the form of opposition to an orchestrated campaign for critical race theory. How do we fight back efficiently in this particular battle? Any other ideas which I guess puff up the historical narrative of America?
Well, first of all, that's a very timely question. And I think it's a direct result of the struggle that led to the erosion of Jim Crow over the past 70-odd years or so. That is to say that there was basically a trade-off. I call it the compromise of 1954. It's a phrase I've used in a number of lectures you can find online. That is to say that the United States, U.S. imperialism, was under pressure because Africa was decolonizing, the Caribbean was decolonizing, and yet you had people of African descent in this country being treated so atrociously. The United States felt that it might be losing the race with the then socialist camp, and so that created a dynamic whereby Jim Crow would be eroded, but in return, many of the most far-sighted leaders, led by the tallest tree in our forest, Paul Robeson, would be tossed overboard. And that left us very compromised in terms of dealing with a very complicated political situation, such as this crisis in Eastern Europe right now, where, by the way, it's interesting and quite telling to find any of our Black intellectuals and leaders who have a coherent critique or analysis. Most of them are just going along with the cheerleading, basically, which could eventuate in the extinction of all humanity.
Why do you think that's mostly the case, Dr. Horne?
I was going to ask that too.
Well, I think it's a direct result of the compromise of 1954. That is to say, I'm doing to update it. So one of my current research projects is on the Black Panther Party.
Oh, right. I was in the Panther Party.
In what city?
Philly, from 71 to 73. Okay.
So I'm dealing with it mostly in Los Angeles, although I'm going to look at it comprehensively. And of course, I'm sure I don't have to tell you about what befell the Black Panther Party, which in some ways was a kind of halfway house between a kind of revolutionary Black nationalism as embodied by Malcolm X and a kind of socialist option
Yes.
as reflected in Paul Robeson. But as you know, and they were subjected to sledgehammer blows, which once again was very damaging ideologically, and made it very difficult for us to understand international politics.
Yes.
Because of course the Black Panther Party was internationalist. They had a mission, as you know, in Algeria. They sent delegations to Vietnam, sent delegations to North Korea, etc. And so nowadays, there are few Black organizations or intellectuals who are thinking international, who have anything intelligent or anything to say about international events. They're all within the context of the United States of America, which is, hello, it's not the world. I mean, it's 5% of the population. So, world population. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that when there's this attack on so-called critical race theory and on an attack on the adequate and accurate history of teaching the history of slavery, Jim Crow, etc., it's a direct result of the fact that our opponents think they have us on the back foot. They think they have us on the defensive. And so they could then force us away from learning our own history, even. I mean, that's how confident they are. But I think that if you reference remarks I made about police terror, that is to say, proceeding locally, nationally, and internationally, you get a glimpse of how we can proceed against this anti-CRT offensive that our opponents are proposing. And of course, with regard to anti-CRT or with regard to repelling the anti-CRT offensive, it can be particularly fruitful on the local level because the way the United States is structured, local school boards have a certain amount of autonomy in terms of instruction. So that's particularly in our wheelhouse.
We're actually in a fight right now. The state legislator, because of the way, I don't know if it's in the Commonwealth structure, the state legislator is trying to seize a means of that control for Louisville, by and large, the biggest urban area in the state of Kentucky by a wide margin. So, the rest of the state is trying to make it where CRT is banned across the board, regardless of that autonomy. So, the struggle continues with that. Yeah, so we're in the belly of the beast in so many ways here. I akin it to almost like Mississippi and the civil rights struggle, where it's like, every turn is a locked door in many ways, but we're keeping that struggle up here.
Well, let me say also that this struggle around teaching obviously is an entree to working with teachers unions. I assume you have teachers unions, either the American Federation of Teachers or the National Education Association.
There's a local outfit of teachers in Jefferson County, and there's a lot of contradictions in that whole set. With there's persons that are in league with the anti-CRT bit that is in leadership with. It's the contradictions are pretty frothed here. So like I said, but we got being in league with those who are against that. We're trying all the different outside forces that we can maintain here. Yeah.
Well, I salute you. I salute what I've heard on SoundCloud. I look forward to collaborating with you again, and I appreciate your inviting me on this afternoon.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you, brother, man. We hitting dingers on both sides of the plates here. We appreciate you, man. And any other final thoughts or remarks here?
Yeah, I just want to say again, Dr. Horne, how heavily influenced I've been by your work. I probably a little closer to your age. I'm 68. Like I said, I came into the movement in 71. So I got a pretty good sweep of it from that time. And I know something of, your radical history and, people you've been adjacent to. And I think that, you're exactly what we need right now. But it's this crazy period because a lot of the social contradictions, even on the left, are really coming to the surface. And we're really seeing how radical people really are. Especially if you don't see the whole connections between, patriarchy, white supremacy and capitalism. I just wanted to mention, you're familiar with a group called WS, World Socialists.
Those are people who've been attacking me.
Yes, they are. They are against CRT.
Yeah, I know. You have to see what they have to say about me.
The leading leftist forces out here. I mean, at least, in the blog world, in the cyberspatial world. But anyway, we thank you.
Man, the struggle continues. Absolutely,
Okay.
brother. And thank you so much for signing off here.
Right on. And send me the link.
Yes, sir. I'll send you the link. Thank you.
Right, good luck.
Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.